June 1966. Binh Nghia Village, Quang Ngai Province, South Vietnam. A series of hamlets strung along the Tra Bong River, 12 miles inland from the South China Sea. 6,000 people lived there. 600 of them were known Viet Cong sympathizers. Over the previous years, 750 young men from those hamlets had joined main force VC units. 2 independent VC companies and 1 full battalion roamed the surrounding district. The Saigon government had been driven out years before. The local Popular Forces militia, the Nghia Quan, sheltered inside a small mud fort and rarely left it after dark. The Viet Cong walked into Binh Nghia whenever they wanted. They collected taxes. They held political meetings. They picked the village chief and replaced him when he stopped cooperating. In the first week of June, 12 Marines from Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, walked into that fort. They were led by a corporal. They were not special forces. They had no Vietnamese language training. They were ordered to live there, not to patrol through, to live there. The Viet Cong would spend the next 18 months trying to figure out what kind of operation that was, and the men sent to wipe them out would not believe what they were seeing. The program began 10 months earlier and 300 miles north at Phu Bai, a Marine airfield south of Hue. The 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, under Lieutenant Colonel William Taylor, was responsible for 10 square miles of countryside, containing 6 villages, and Taylor did not have enough rifles to defend it. His executive officer, Major Cullen Zimmerman, had been reading on the British Army in 19th century India, particularly the practice of brigading native units with regular battalions to raise both numbers and quality. Zimmerman drafted a plan to integrate Taylor's rifle squads with the 6 local Popular Forces platoons, sharing watches and patrols. The proposal went up through Colonel E.B. Wheeler at 4th Marines to 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, where Major General Lew Walt approved it. General Nguyen Van Chuan, the ARVN I Corps commander, signed over operational control of the local PF platoons. On 3 August 1965, 4 hand-picked Marine rifle squads, 4 Navy corpsmen, and a 3-man command element under 1st Lieutenant Paul Eck went to live in the villages around Phu Bai. Eck had served as an advisor to Army Special Forces and spoke some Vietnamese. The Marines had received 2 weeks of orientation on Vietnamese customs and the program's mission. The Joint Action Company was born, without a doctrinal name. Within months, the results were measurable. Local officials began sleeping in their own homes again. Villagers started providing tactical intelligence. VC tax collection in the affected hamlets dropped. The Marines lived in the hooches, ate the rice, learned the names of the children. Walt expanded the program. Other Marine regiments started their own. The unit was renamed Combined Action Company, then Combined Action Platoon, because CAC in Vietnamese is a vulgarity, and the motto's reference to Suk Mang, strength, made the troops laugh. The basic shape settled in: 13 Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, 15 to 30 Popular Forces, 1 Vietnamese hamlet. The Marines patrolled at night. They patrolled with the militiamen. They lived in fortified positions inside the villages they were supposed to protect, and over time, those positions stopped being inside the village and started being part of it. This was the inverse of the war General William Westmoreland was running. Westmoreland's MAC-V strategy in 1965 and 1966 was attrition through search and destroy. American battalions would push out into the unpopulated mountains and forests, find the People's Army main force units, and grind them down with firepower. Population protection was the South Vietnamese Army's job. Westmoreland later wrote in A Soldier Reports that he was concerned the Marines were not pushing aggressively enough out of their coastal enclaves to find and fight the enemy's regulars.
Lieutenant General Victor Krulak, commanding Fleet Marine Force Pacific, thought Westmoreland had the war upside down. Krulak's data said 80% of South Vietnamese lived along the narrow coastal belt where the rice grew. If you protected that belt and denied the VC its supplies, taxes, and recruits, the main force units in the mountains would starve. The Marines, under Walt in I Corps, attempted both fights at once, the big sweeps against the NVA in the hills and the slow embedding of squads in the villages. MACV viewed the CAP program as a manpower drain. The official Marine history of 1968 quotes MACV's assessment of the platoons as too manpower-intensive and too slow in pacifying. William Corson, who would soon command the program, recalled MACV's line as, "If you want to play around with such foolishness, you'll have to eat the personnel spaces out of your own hide. No additional Marines will be made available to support combined action. We'll starve you out." This was Binh Nghie's strategic backdrop in June 1966. The 7th Marines had decided to plant a cap in one of the most VC-dominated hamlets in Quang Ngai, and the High Command in Saigon did not want them to do it. The Marines in the fort were Charlie Company volunteers chosen by their NCOs for steadiness. The first nights were quiet. By late June, the corporal commanding had decided the militia needed to be moved out into the dark, and the joint patrols began going further from the fort, then staying out overnight. By mid-July, after roughly 6 weeks, Binh Nghia was known throughout I Corps as the scene of more night actions than any other village in the tactical zone. The combined strength of 15 Marines and 20 PFs was patrolling a village of 6,000 people, ambushing the VC who had walked the trails for years unchallenged. In the first 100 days, the CAP fired over 400 patrols and was in or near contact more than 200 times. The Marines learned the back paths and the fence gaps the way the local guerrillas knew them, because the local PFs taught them. The Viet Cong stopped collecting taxes in the village. The shadow government stopped meeting there. Captain Francis West, who patrolled with the unit for the Marine Corps to document the experiment, called his 1967 Marine Corps Gazette article "Fast Rifles," because the Marines had the fastest rifles in Binh Nghia, and within a few months, the second fastest belonged to the PFs. What had been a comfortable VC operating area was now a closed door, and the enemy responded the only way they knew. They tried to kill the door. The district VC committee called in regular help. On one night, the post at Binh Nghia was hit by an attacking force estimated at 140 enemy combatants. There were 5 Marines and 12 militiamen inside the fort. The rest of the platoon was out on patrol. Most of the Marines inside the fort died holding it. The PFs held out long enough for the patrols to come back, regroup, and break the assault. Of the 12 Marines who appeared in a 1966 photograph of the Binh Nghia CAP, 6 were killed in that village before their rotations ended. Sergeant J.D. White, the squad leader who replaced the original corporal, finished his tour and left Binh Nghia on 9 January 1967. Before he reached home in the United States, his mother received a letter from a village chief named Chow, who had worked with him. Chow wrote in broken English that the Marines were good men, and that his people were happy when they saw a Marine, and that when the VC came to talk to the people came to talk to Sergeant White instead. The letter survives in West's papers because Sergeant White's mother kept it. By the time the Tet Offensive began on 30 January 1968, the program had grown to 79 platoons. The North Vietnamese plan was to move tens of thousands of regulars out of the mountains, through the populated coastal villages, and into the cities of I Corps for simultaneous assault. The villages were on the route. The combined action platoons were in the villages. According to the Department of Defense analysis cited in the official Marine Corps history of 1968, between 1 November 1967 and 31 January 1968, 49% of all enemy-initiated attacks in I Corps fell on combined action platoons. In February, the figure was 38%. The Marine history flatly notes that this period of high contact with the Caps coincided with the buildup and attack phases of Tet. The Caps were not interlinked. They were single squads in single villages, scattered across hundreds of kilometers. They had no on-call artillery because the village they would be calling it onto was the village they lived in. Forewarned by the network of villagers they had spent 2 years learning, they held for 11 straight days of daily combat. The NVA did not get through them in any number that mattered. The cities took the blow directly. The villages did not break. In the 5 years it ran, from 1965 to 1971, the Combined Action Program operated in more than 800 hamlets, protecting roughly 500,000 civilians. 2,200 Marines did this work, 3% of the Marines who served in Vietnam. Of the 209 villages a Cap was permanently posted to, none reverted to communist control while the Cap was there. 540 Marines were killed. They accounted for 4,900 enemy killed by rifle and grenade, almost without supporting arms. The fatality rate inside the Caps was above 10%, more than triple the Marine average for the war, and roughly double the rate of the rifle battalions doing search and destroy. Sir Robert Thompson, the British counterinsurgency expert who had run the Malayan emergency, told MACV the program was the best idea he had seen in Vietnam. Westermoreland, in his memoir, conceded the Caps were a noteworthy innovation. He also said he simply had not enough men to expand them. In September 1970, 3 MAF deactivated the program as the Marines drew down. In 1972, American combat troops were gone, and 3 years later, when North Vietnamese armor came down the coast, the villages that had hosted Caps were among the last to fall. After the war, the new government renamed several of them. The records the Marines have kept describe this as a sign of frustration with farmers who had refused to come over. When Captain West returned to Binh Nghia in 2002 to look at the village he had patrolled with 36 years before, he found that a cement well the Marines had helped dig was still standing in one of the hamlets, with a Vietnamese inscription on it thanking them. The surviving popular forces from the platoon, men who had been imprisoned for years after 1975, were old men by then, living in the village as respected elders. The Combined Action Platoon at Binh Nghia had been disbanded in October 1967 because the Marines were no longer needed.